Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday to you. It is Monday, April 23rd. If you're watching the video, that means you've already done a good job following directions because you are here. So today, Mrs. Love is at PSSA testing, and I will be gone the entire week. So all of your lessons will be in the class announcements and most likely in Edpuzzle. So today we're going to cover Unit 11, Lesson number 6, and it's covering chapters 47 and 48 in our textbook. If you have not read those, I would recommend doing that reading today. So let's get started and see if you can identify who these men are. Take a moment and look at each picture and see if you can name them. We have seen them all in Unit 11. So if you want to pause the video and try to guess, go ahead and do that and then come back and I'll tell you the answers. All right, so here is your answers. The first person is Fidel Castro. Remember, he is the leader of Cuba. We learned about him a couple of weeks ago. The second person, of course, is Martin Luther King Jr. The third one is President Lyndon Johnson. And the last one is President John Kennedy. So give yourself a little applause if you knew all of them. All right, so what we're going to be covering in this lesson today is talking about Martin Luther King and how he won the Nobel Peace Prize, and that he was the youngest person at that time to win it. We are going to talk about the restrictions on voting rights for Black people in the South during the 1960s. We're going to talk about a new person, Malcolm X. And we're going to talk about the events in Selma and how television influenced the progression of the civil rights movement. A lot to cover today. Excuse me. All right, so first of all, let's talk about this, the Nobel Peace Prize. What is that? It is, the Nobel Prizes are these awards that are given out in different categories to people all over the world, rewarding them for some great work that they have done. And there's a lot of categories. There's categories in literature and art and science. And this one is in peace. So on November 27th, this guy in 1895, this guy named Alfred Nobel signed his last will and testament and gave the largest share of his fortune to fund this thing called the Nobel Prizes. And it was described in his will that one part should be dedicated to the person who shall have done the most or best work for fraternity between nations, for the abolition or reduction of standing armies, and for the holding and promotion of peace congresses. So if you want to learn more about Nobel Peace Prizes, you can Google that online. I think it's nobelprizes.com or something like that. So we're going to talk about the Nobel Peace Prize of 1964. This was awarded to Martin Luther King Jr. He was the youngest person to have ever won the prize at that time, and he was nominated for this award after he gave that speech on the March on Washington. And remember, you were supposed to have watched the video of that speech for a homework assignment from last week. So if you have not done that, you can go back through your class announcements and look for the link to that. Or you could just go on YouTube and look it up. So he was nominated for this award, but surprisingly, many people did not think he deserved that honor. And I don't know, maybe you can pause for a moment and think about why maybe people didn't feel that he deserved it. All right, so regardless of whether or not people thought he deserved it, he does end up getting this award. And in a moment, a link to a video is going to pop up, and it's going to show you the coverage of him receiving the award. So go ahead, and when it pops up, go ahead and watch the video and then come on back. Okay, so here's what is happening. He wins this award, and remember, we talked last week how Lyndon Johnson was able to get the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed. And this made discrimination against people of any group, of any minority group, illegal. Segregation was no longer allowed. No more separate but equal. And it banned employment discrimination. That means if somebody went to try to get a job somewhere, they could not refuse to hire them because of their race. It was now against the law. But here's the problem. As you can imagine, places that we have learned about, like Birmingham, Alabama, and a lot of other southern cities did not want to support these laws. And as we have seen in the past, they would figure out ways to squeak around the laws and still discriminate. And one of the ways they did that was in voting. In some areas, Black people were still being denied the right to vote. So, here's what they did. Many towns in the South made it really difficult for people to register to vote. What they would do is they would register people on only 1 or 2 days a month. So if you couldn't make it on that day, you couldn't register. And oftentimes, when Black people arrived at the registration sites, there'd be people blocking the doors, being intimidated, not letting them get through. And if they did get through, they were often told they could not get their voter registration unless they passed a test. Well, this was totally not true. It was not legal, really. But they made these tests so difficult that people couldn't pass them. Because remember, many people in the South were not educated. So they may not have had the skills to pass these tests. Something else they would do is they would tell people, well, you can register to vote, but you have to pay this fee or this toll. And it oftentimes was a large amount of money that people could not afford. So the whole idea was to keep Black people from being able to vote. And this is just another form of discrimination because, as you know, in many of these places in the South, people didn't want to go along with these new civil rights laws. So they were going to find other ways to discriminate. And this is what they did. So we're going to hop into a place called Selma, Alabama in the year 1964. And you can look at the map and see where it is. In this community, the leaders of this small, mostly Black community, they invite Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership group to come to their town and help them fight for their voting rights because they had been experiencing all of these things when people were trying to register to vote. So Selma was a very large Black community, but was still one of the most racist towns in the South because even though there were a lot of Black people living there, the leaders of that community, the city council and the mayor and people like that, they were white people and they were very, very racist. So this group invites Martin Luther King and his friends who have had success doing this in other places. They invite them to Selma to see if they can help. So after a period of time, they decide to organize a march from Selma to Montgomery. Okay, and you can look on the map here to see where that is. It's going to go from over here all the way over here. And the point of this march or this demonstration was, again, just like they had done other demonstrations, to bring attention to this town where people were being discriminated against and being denied their right to vote. So a huge amount of people begin to march in Montgomery in support of the voting rights, but they get stopped at this bridge by a blockade of policemen. And after a while, even though it is a peaceful protest, they are attacked by the police and other people in the crowd. They get into fights, they get beaten and whipped, and they use tear gas against them. And it gets extremely violent and out of hand, and many, many people are injured and hospitalized. And as a result, this brings very much attention to the problems still happening in the South, even after the passage of the Civil Rights Act. So this event, which is broadcast on television all over the country, people are seeing what's going on. This is considered the catalyst or the event that pushes through the Voting Rights Act several months later, that eventually is signed by President Johnson. So this is there's a movie actually they made about this called Selma. It's a really good movie. If you ask your families if you're permitted to watch it, it shows this whole event and what happened. And you can also read about this in more detail in our book. Okay, so after Selma, there's something else. Another person who starts to gain notoriety for the civil rights movement. And this is somebody we haven't talked about before, but his name is Malcolm X. And he led a group called the Nation of Islam. And originally, he did not follow this idea of peaceful protesting. He was one of the guys that way back when Martin Luther King started, he said, this peaceful protesting thing, it's not going to work. If we want to fight for something, we're going to have to fight hard. And a lot of the groups that he worked with would actually become more involved in these more violent, loud, and, ruckus-filled events rather than the peaceful kind of protesting that Martin Luther King did. But if you read about Malcolm X in our book, you will find out that he changes his mind about this after he spends some time going through a religious experience through the Nation of Islam. And he changes his mind, and he becomes another leader who decides that the way to freedom and the way to equality is through peace, not through violence. And what I would like you to do now, and actually, this is an old slide. I should have erased this. Don't use this login anymore. I want you to log in with your BrainPop account and go ahead and watch the video about Malcolm X. So pause this video. When you finish watching BrainPop, come back to this, and then you'll see what the rest of your assignment is. Okay, so to wrap things up for today, here is what you need to do. Your homework is to read chapter 47 and 48. Study guide questions, I will have to put these in the online school for you, and you can fill those out. Complete your graded assignment for Unit 11, Lesson 6. It says 11.6 here, but ours will say Unit 11, Lesson 6. Make sure you are up to date on all your previous assignments. Tomorrow, we will have a quiz, okay? So I will put the study guide questions in the online school so you can review for that quiz before you take the quiz. You can do that quiz tomorrow if you are not completely caught up